I make a lot of videos on YouTube, and a lot of people have seen other videos, but in case this is their first one, which sometimes happens, I select different subjects to focus on, and because of the YouTube limit, we have a limited amount of time here to go into some things that are sometimes very complicated. Now, one of my favorite subjects of all time is the subject of sound, and there's a little story behind that, because a long time ago, back in the early 70s, I had become very fascinated by electronics and by meditation, which are two vastly different things, you could say. But in a part of that process, I began to read a lot of ancient books and so on, and such as the Upanishads, and I kept coming across this statement that, in truth, the power of so-called God, or one aspect of the power of so-called the God, is sound. Because so that really struck me. I mean, you think about that for a minute, like, because at one point you say, well, you know, we only know about sound, for example, what we can hear, which is very limited. So if you can dismiss it, you say, well, you know, what's sound got to do with God or anything? But then you think about it a little bit further, and you realize that, for one thing, there's all kinds of sounds going on in our daily life. Nothing mystical about them, but we just don't hear them. It's a very practical thing, because our ears, they say, is roughly 15 cycles a second, up to, if you're lucky, maybe 20,000 or so, a high note. But the audio portion of what we usually use in our day-to-day life really covers only 5,000 or 6,000 cycles range. So that being the point, you think about the statement is that God is sound, and that we should meditate on God as sound, and that the sound ultimately is responsible for one aspect of the material creation that we see. Now, once again, I read those ancient statements, and I thought to myself, this is a very, very powerful subject, because now we know, I knew from electronic study and other aspects of physics, that indeed sound permeates all kinds of materials. There's a huge range of different kinds of sounds, and beyond that, there's incredible, basically infinite range of frequencies that exist in our universe that follow certain properties, the properties of waves. So I knew by investigating sound that you would get some clue to all the other frequencies, you might say. So, and beyond that, as I said, I practiced a meditation, and a part of that process, I began to hear indescribable sounds that were within. And naturally, it makes total sense, because I'm a vehicle, I have a body, there's sound in me, my heart's pumping. There's sounds going on in the actual creation of my own body. And in that respect, the light that's in my body, the water that's in my body, the heat that's in my body, and the sounds and all the other things that are in my body are approachable through meditation. And this is exactly what these ancient teachings have been saying. You know, by accessing something close to you, you can unlock and understand what's in further and further distance from you, you might say. Now, I'm going to have to make a long series about this, because I started writing a book back in the 80s, and I have documents and a lot of research papers and so on, plus a lot of other thoughts and videos and other things on the subject. But I'm not the only person, of course, that's investigated. This is a very fascinating subject, and many people have studied it. But I have my own approach, and one of the things that inspired me was a book that I read long ago called A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. If you don't like to read or you get bored easily, don't try this book. Actually, it's not real boring at all, but it takes some thinking to digest it. And actually, I had to read it a few times, and I still go back to it again and again and again. Apparently, well, this is not anything new. A lot of people know that for a long, long time, there are people around the world who understood certain aspects of kinds of sciences that we might say the people call them the spiritual sciences or the alchemy or the this or that. Basically, there's different ways of approaching the perception of energy and managing energy. And what these ancient teachings say, look, you know, if you look at this subject of sound and understand how sound actually shapes materials, and has an enormous power, you'll unlock some very interesting pieces of knowledge, understanding. Now, a common thing that people don't realize is that we look at the sun every day and we don't think of the sun as having sound. But I was reading recently, well, actually a number of years ago, that they had discovered that around the sun's corona, basically there's this sort of like sphere around the sun, the inner sun, the core of the sun, and it is apparently vibrating at such a high rate, almost like a huge, huge sound. It's ultrasound at such a high frequency that it's heated up to something like 6,000 degrees, 6 million, or some unreal number. 6,000 isn't very much, actually, but it was just incredible to think that, you know, there's some vibration that's vibrating at that rate. Now, maybe we can't physically hear that sound. We can't. We just don't have the equipment. It's not possible. But if there's some way that that power, that energy can radiate through the mysterious hidden spaces, through gravity and through just, I mean, some force of that nature, it goes out, it expands. There's some way that wave travels. It continues to travel, for sure. And that's a great mystery in our modern science, because there's a lot of stuff out there that even if you look at just astronomy, let's say in 2000, excuse me, around the turn of the century, Einstein, 1905, somewhere around there. Since then, we've had all this incredible electronic discovery, unbelievable stuff, and just you can't. I won't even bore you with details. Just amazing nano architecture, incredible stuff going on these days, in 100 years. And yet, we still don't understand what's out there in space, in some aspects of matter and energy, that some of these ancient teachings try to help us understand. So again, I'm going to recommend a few books here. This Treatise on Cosmic Fire is Alice A. Bailey, and here's another book called by Cyril Scott, The Secret Influence of Music Through the Ages. I mean, besides people who were deliberately interested in making tones because they had some mystical, in other words, deliberate, they were practitioners or something, they just want to make some mystical type of music and they set it all up to certain tones. But then there's natural music, there's music that just sort of evolved, folk music that wasn't so deliberate, but just real basic and still very, very powerful. Religious music, war music, all kinds of stuff that, you know, think about it for a minute. Here's Music and Sound in the Healing Arts by Jean Beaulieu. Another interesting book. Music and Your Health. Another one called Measure for Measure, Musical History of Science. Again, because our desire to hear, there's all kinds of inventions that have happened because of people interested in hearing more, hearing aids, for example, music, all kinds of stuff. So, I'm going to cut it short here, and I'll go on.